Welcome to Deep Dive Politics. I'm LloydAustin and I'm with Scott Lucas from Birmingham University. What does this appointment of Lloyd Austin as a defense secretary mean for Biden's foreign policy? And is there any kind of like a symbolic understanding of this appointment?
Oh, thank you. It's great to do a deep dive on this important appointment of General Lloyd Austin by Joe Biden. There will be the immediate issue that you mentioned as to whether General Austin or retired General Austin's confirmation violates the norm of civilian control of the military. This will be only the third time that an administration has asked Congress for a waiver, because the normal provision is that anyone who is in the military cannot become defense secretary until 7 years after retirement. And General Austin only has been retired for 4 years. I think he will probably go through, although there will be some qualms from Democrats about breaking this norm. And then is the question of, okay, what does it mean within a Biden administration's foreign policy? And I don't think it means that much for policy, and that might seem strange because we're talking about the defense secretary, but I think General Austin is more someone who is there as an implementer. He's there to take what is given to him and to, working with the military, put it into practice. His background is very distinguished. He was the staff director for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was the commander of American troops, coalition troops in Iraq at a very important point when the US presence was being drawn down after 2010. And he then took the exalted position of head of Central Command, that command of the United States that covers the Mediterranean, that covers the Middle East, covers Turkey. And at a time when the United States was trying to figure out what to do about the Syrian conflict, about issues like Iraq, and then of course the surge of the Islamic State from 2014. And Austin is very well respected in terms of being an official in the field, an official who could work with other military commanders, work with the troops to enact whatever plans were put before him. I don't see him, however, as the type of retired general who's more of a policy person, generating policy. Think, for example, about David Petraeus. Now, David Petraeus had been, of course, commander of US forces in Iraq during the surge. He then comes back in 2011, 2012, as the director of the CIA under Barack Obama. And when you talk about Petraeus, he was very much involved in the policy discussions, say, for example, on Syria, discussions that also involved Turkey about how much the United States would support an armed Syrian opposition and how much it would protect civilians. Petraeus ultimately lost the argument, but still he was there in the room with Obama. He was there in the room with Biden. I think Austin will be someone who will give advice from the standpoint of the military situation. He'll give advice on whether plans can be implemented, but I don't see him as being on the lead on policy. You have to look to Biden. You have to look to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and the new Director of the Office of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. Those will be the key officials.
Especially Biden is really behind this appointment, and then he said that it's not breaking the balance between the civil and military balance actually in America for Biden. And he said that the main reason he picked up Austin was because he reacts well under pressure and he knows the region very well. So also you mentioned a little bit about his role in the greater Middle Eastern. I'm just wondering, what does it mean for Middle East and for, of course, for someone from Turkey? I'm just wondering, what does it mean for Turkey? So do you think Biden is going back to like Obama's foreign policy vision in the great Middle East and become more active than before?
I mean, Turkey has this, or at least the Erdogan government has this concern about Austin, because Austin was there at a time when the United States shifted its emphasis from the anti-Assad forces, the forces that were now called the Syrian National Army, which of course is supported by Turkey, and the U.S. shifted from that in 2015 to the Syrian Democratic Forces. In fact, they helped create the Syrian Democratic Forces, which of course is led by Kurdish groups including the YPG militia, which is connected to the Syrian Kurdish party, the PYD, which in turn Turkey sees as connected to the PKK and the Turkish insurgency. So if you follow that chain, Lloyd-Austin was there as the U.S. head of Central Command when the United States shifted its military backing from the anti-Assad forces that Turkey was also supporting to the Kurdish forces that are opposed by the Turks. But I don't think Austin generated that shift. Mm-hmm. I think Austin was the one who implemented it, but it came from the politicians. Mm-hmm. What had happened in 2015 is that the United States, and I can go into this because it's not a very happy story at least, the United States was really in a mess in terms of what its position was with the anti-Assad rebels, the Free Syrian Army, if you will. They were giving it training, they were giving it equipment, but were they giving it enough training? Were they giving it enough equipment? And what happened is that when the Free Syrian Army went in with the American arms and the equipment, Jabhat al-Nusra, the faction which had been, in fact, was still linked at that point to Al-Qaeda, confronted them, took the equipment, and the Americans were embarrassed by it. Mm-hmm. And so the Americans shifted all of a sudden. They said, well, this isn't reliable. And when I say the Americans said that this would be people like Obama, like Biden, like Secretary of State John Kerry at the time, they would have said, we just can't keep working with this Syrian armed opposition. At the same time, the Islamic State was moving across northern Syria. So the Americans say, we have to have a force to push back the Islamic State. If it's not the anti-Assad rebels, if it's not the Free Syrian Army, who is it? Oh, this Kurdish force that held out against the Islamic State in Kobani, that town on the border, they held out against the Islamic State, we'll back them. And to the extent, as in a military calculation, they were right. I mean, the Syrian Democratic Forces have pushed the Islamic State out of much of northern Syria, especially northeast Syria. That means the Kurds control northeast Syria. But now you have the political question. And the political question is, well, do you allow the Kurds to remain in control of northeast Syria, even though the Turks or the Erdogan government is opposed to this? Or do you, as it were, say, yeah, we understand what you're saying, Ankara, we'll pull back, we won't support Kurdish autonomy, and then we'll see if the Assad regime moves in, or we'll see if Turkey expands its influence. That's where we are with the political question. Do I think Lloyd-Austin will be part of the political changes in 2021? No, I think he's there as a planner. What matters is what Joe Biden does. And let me be honest with you, what matters is what President Erdogan does. Because in the next few weeks, Turkey, which already has taken the corridor, that area across northeast Syria, across the Euphrates River, all the way to the Iraq border, do they push further into northeast Syria? Do they push further despite what the Americans might say, despite what Russia might say? Do they say, we'll take this gamble while Donald Trump is still in office? Or do they say, well, no, it's too risky, we'll hang back and see what Joe Biden does?
From Turkish side, I could just say, as far as this Austin's appeared on the news, Turkey, I mean, some people, especially some media organization or some source of journalists, raised this issue and saying that maybe because his experience in the Syria may cause some kind of like a trouble for Turkey, but you already underlined that it is because he was implementer. He's not a decision maker. So basically, it depends on what Biden administration thinks about this situation or Turkey with the relations with the Turkey. However, I'm just wondering, doesn't Austin affect Biden's maybe mindset for the?
Well, I think what might affect the mindset in a way is the Pentagon. So the Department of Defense, but it's sort of there even before Austin takes place. And by that I said, look, our viewers will know the story about how twice Donald Trump, after conversations with President Erdogan, said, that's it, we're withdrawing from Syria. He did it in December 2018. He did it again in October 2019, just before Turkey sent its military across the border. And your viewers will know that the Pentagon pushed back against Donald Trump, so there was not a full withdrawal of American forces. There are at least 1,000 American personnel, about half of them with the Syrian Democratic Forces, half of them at a base in eastern Syria on the Iraq border. So in other words, the Pentagon took a policy initiative because of who they were dealing with. Okay. They didn't want to implement Trump's order, so they kind of acted on their own, working with, for example, the U.S. envoy, James Jeffrey, who's just retired. And so, yes, at that point, the Pentagon was influential, but that's because of the type of president that they had. I think the first thing that you're going to see is that the Biden administration will take stock of the situation. Now, that will include Austin and the Pentagon. It will include the State Department. It will include the CIA, where Gina Haspel is the director. And they'll say, exactly where are we with Syria? Because as you and I have discussed before, Syria is not one country, it's three. The Assad regime-controlled territory, the area in northwest Syria with anti-Assad control backed by Turkey, and then the Kurds up in the northeast. And, you know, my bet is that the Biden administration will do this and that the Pentagon will be along with this. It will say, this effective partition of Syria, this remains. We stabilize this, right? We don't unsettle this, because if we unsettle it, who knows what will happen? What will Russia do? What will Iran do? As well as what will Turkey do? So they'll effectively, they won't officially recognize the partition of Syria, but that's de facto. Then what I think they will do is, regarding that Kurdish area, including in the talks with Ankara, they'll say, look, let's make the Syrian Kurdish leadership, let's try to treat it as distinct from PKK. Now, we know that these groups have had links with PKK, but as they maintain control of northeast Syria, let's emphasize to them, you do not continue to work with PKK. You are Syrian Kurdish and not part of PKK fighting against Ankara. Do I think that'll work? Well, again, remember, there's not just one Kurdish group in northeast Syria. There are several Kurdish groups. So, you know, you have sort of a bit of a chessboard with more pieces that are on there. They're not necessarily all PKK pieces.
Okay, I think we should wait and see how it's going to shape in the future. I mean, it's after Biden's inauguration, I think we will see. But the final note, do you think the Congress blocked this way for retired Army General LloydAustin? Because I know some, especially House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, followed Biden's lead in terms of the appointment of this general as a Secretary of Defense, as Defense Secretary. So, do you think it is going to be 100% that Austin will be the Defense Ministry?
Well, there've been some influential voices that have expressed concern. Because, you know, as you noted, this is military control, or at least someone who recently was in the military controlling the Pentagon. Senator Jack Reed of the Senate Armed Services Committee has expressed concern. He's a Democrat, but some moderate Republicans like Susan Collins have expressed concern. But at the end of the day, I don't think there'll be that many Republicans that will oppose Austin, because then it looks like they're opposing the military. You know, they're keeping America from being strong, as it were. And for the Democrats, the problem there is if you oppose Austin being confirmed, he would be the first Black American to lead the Pentagon. That's a symbolic breakthrough. Do you really want to stand in the way of that? So I think they'll hold their noses, as it were, and they'll approve the waiver.
Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing your thoughts and interpretations for the recent developments in Washington. And see you later. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.